Look, writing is hard. It's a skill that's just not for everybody, no matter how many M-dashes they have to delete from their ChatGPT prompt. But dang it, Brian's just gonna keep trying and trying and trying. So today, let's take a look at all the times Brian tried to become a writer, only to, more often than not, fail miserably. So the first mention of Brian ever wanting to be a writer actually comes at the end of Stewie Griffin: The Untold Story, where the characters meet up for an after-party and talk about their life post-movie.
So I worked on my novel and spent some time getting to know my fans. Give something back to the people who got me where I am.
Haunting foreshadowing to Brian's most notorious literary venture, Faster Than the Speed of Love. A novel about a pilot or something. I don't know, I fall asleep just listening to him describe it, so I don't think I'll ever get around to actually reading it. But in order to read it, Brian has to get around to actually writing it, because when the episode Brian the Bachelor rolls around, it's clear he's still yet to make progress on it.
How you coming on that novel you're working on? Huh? Got a big stack of papers there?
Hey, maybe Brian is a true writer. After all, half the battle of being one just involves coming up with a bunch of ideas you'll never actually put to paper. Luckily, Brian has a good friend like Stewie to constantly remind him of it and hold him accountable.
Working on that for quite some time, huh? Yeah, talking about that 3 years ago. Yeah, been working on that the whole time?
Just you wait, Stewie. Brian's gonna write a character for you in his novel just to have you killed. Then you'll be sorry you ever mocked him. But to be fair, Stewie's increasing high pitch to rib Brian over the book is one of the highlights of the early seasons.
Yeah, you got to... No, you deserve some time off.
And Stewie would continue to remind him about his failing career again and again, with the next instance being later in that same season with the episode Brian goes back to college.
Seems to me you should spend less time working for the paper and more time working on that novel you've been working on.
Yeah, that was bound to happen. Stewie's voice was getting so high that it practically became a dog whistle, so can you really blame Brian for reacting the way he did? But at least Brian was writing something, which is more than can be said for some people who call themselves writers. But Brian would finally get a jump on actually writing his novel in the episode Movin' Out Brian Song by completing the most important part of any book, the title.
Faster Than the Speed of Love.
Okay, off to a great start. Well, titles can always be changed later. Did you know the Hunger Games used to be called the Starving Activities? I think the new name rolls off the tongue a bit better, right? And while you can't always judge a book by its cover, you can judge it pretty harshly by its contents.
That's the movie Iron Eagle.
What? Is that a recent film?
Not only is it not recent, but it's also not even a very good movie. That movie actually came out the same year as Top Gun, and well, you can probably guess which fighter jet action movie became a household name. You weren't all that slick, Brian.
In mine, the boy's got to gather all these old World War II pilots to help him rescue his father.
That's one of the sequels!
Well, I guess I'd rather him try and copy a bad idea than a good one. A bad idea can at least be improved upon, but judging by the sound of Lois's laughter, I wouldn't bet that Brian is doing much improving.
Well, in mine, one of the World War II guys is Japanese, but they accept him anyway.
But Brian would try to write from the heart and play it again, Brian, writing an essay inspired by Lois that ends up causing some rifts in his relationship with Peter.
My essay won first prize in the New England Rising Writers Contest. I'm gonna be honored at the big ceremony on Martha's Vineyard.
Well, a broken clock wins an award at least once, is how I think that saying goes. At the same time, Peter and Lois are going through a bit of a rough patch, so Brian decides to invite them out to Martha's Vineyard with him so they can have a vacation.
What do you think's keeping Peter? I hope he gets here before they give you your award.
Well, you're here, Lois. That's enough for me.
I'm sure it is. Everything's lining up just like Brian would like it to. Peter's off getting drunk, and Brian finally has a way of expressing his love to Lois without outright saying it. Love triangles are so messy, especially when they involve your dog.
For circumstance had bound her to my best friend, through whom we met in the warmth and serenity of her home.
Man, not even trying to be subtle about it, huh? I think even complete strangers in that room would know his exact intentions behind that essay. But whatever, it was sweet at least.
That was beautiful, Brian.
Well, you know what they say. Write what's in your heart.
Weird, I didn't hear anything about liquor or distasteful adult websites. Must have been writing from somebody else's heart. So with Peter being neglectful as always, Brian and Lois spend the next day on what onlookers would consider a pretty romantic date. But then they would realize that's a dog and then proceed to throw up in their mouths.
That essay I wrote it about you.
Oh, I had a hunch.
Well, you admitted it, and she didn't immediately call it a night. I guess that means Brian's clear for takeoff to absolutely ruin their relationship.
Oh my God, Brian, no! No, stop it! What are you doing?
I can't help myself, Lois.
Look, it's her fault for giving him the vaguest, non-intentional signals that she was okay with this. If you really didn't want him doing this, you should have said that, ignoring the fact that you didn't say you wanted him to do this either. Well, it's out in the open now, so I guess all they can really learn to do is live with it and move past it. But while this isn't exactly the happy ending Brian wanted, it at least gave him his most personal, insightful bit of writing he's ever produced.
Well, to be honest, Lois, I ripped off most of that speech from Summer of 42.
How?
Of course. Why would we expect anything less from the king of not having a single original thought? But maybe Brian just needs a good editor to go through it, and luckily for him, Stewie decides to become just that when he's accidentally left at home alone and baby not on board.
I'm gonna take Brian's novel and replace every use of the word "and" with the word "fart."
See, Stewie's more closely connected to the younger generation, so this may just be the change that makes the book appeal to a wider audience. But that also kinda sounds like an idea that's funnier in theory rather than in execution.
They would both emerge farting on their feet. That one didn't work.
You know, we wouldn't be all that shocked if Brian just never did a read-through of his novel and ended up publishing it in that state. It would definitely explain the reception the book would later get, but I'll be damned if I give Brian the benefit of the doubt that it was good to begin with. But Brian would eventually finish his book sometime around the events of the episode 420, as Carter would use it as a bartering tool to get Brian's help in making marijuana illegal again.
It's your novel, Brian. Faster than the speed of love. Ready to ship out tomorrow.
Kinda sounds like when Moses threatened to release a swarm of locusts on Egypt. But Carter's gone above and beyond to turn this glorified tree killer into something people may actually consider picking up and reading.
And what's this? Is this an Oprah Book Club sticker? I think it is.
Wait, really?
Back then, Oprah was the judge, jury, and executioner on whether a book was worth reading or not. This would be the biggest, albeit undeserving, compliment Brian may ever get for his book. But what's Stewie's opinion on it? After all, he's probably the only one who's come close to actually reading the thing.
Your novel is good enough to be published on its own merits.
Either he was dropping a deuce while he was saying that, or this is a lie that physically pains him to say. But Brian decides to take the bait, abandoning his political morals in favor of having his book out there in the world. And what exactly does the world think about it?
Faster Than the Speed of Love has astonishingly not sold a single copy thanks to universal panning by literary critics.
Yeah, sounds about right. Well, Brian may not have any pride, dignity, or respect to show for his efforts, but at least his books have found some kind of use.
And Stewie got to build a nice little fort with all of your unsold books.
My house is made of mediocrity.
As if public humiliation wasn't bad enough, Brian also has to endure being belittled about his writing ability by Quagmire, as part of his iconic roast of him in Jerome is the New Black.
And you delude yourself by thinking you're some great writer, even though you're terrible. You know, I should have known Cheryl Tiegs didn't write me that note.
It's one thing to have the entire world dunk on you, but it hurts just a bit more when your mortal enemy is the one doing it. But I'd like to think Brian kept writing just to spite him, putting out trash into the world just to make Quagmire angry. He's still polluting the world, but at least he can find some solace in being a terrible writer. But things sometimes turned around for Brian, with his genius finally being recognized. After all, he did end up winning an award for his book in Doggone.
Found a website for a group called the Rhode Island Society for Special Literary Excellence.
And apparently this group liked Brian's book so much that they decided to center their next book discussion around it. So will they be talking about the actual plot, or the best thing you could use the book for if you don't want to read it? Doorstop, paperweight, toilet paper, the possibilities are endless.
They love the book so much, they want to give me their most prestigious award.
My sentiments exactly, Lois. It'd be a lot easier to celebrate Brian's successes if he didn't use them to try to act like the next messiah. And maybe Brian should have done a bit more research on the Rhode Island Society for Special Literary Excellence. For starters, their acronym spells RISSLE, and that's just a bunch of nonsense. Oh yeah, and there's that other thing.
The simplistic writing style is very graspable to them.
Here's your award, I made it all by myself.
Hey, at this point, you gotta take the audience as you can. Beggars can't be choosers after all. But Brian would take a break from the novel and revisit an old spec script he wrote for a television series in Brian Griffin's House of Pain.
What I Learned on Jefferson Street, written by H. Brian Griffin. Oh, yes!
The H probably stands for Hindenburg, given Brian's propensity for crashing and burning. But Brian actually thinks the script is pretty good and gently nudges Lois into reading it to get her opinion.
Oh gosh, you know what? I don't even know what I did with the copy that you gave. There it is.
Well, just as gently as you can prod someone with a knife. But not only does Lois read it, she actually thinks it's the best thing Brian has ever written.
It was enchanting. This Brian Griffin? I've never met this Brian Griffin.
He's an elusive creature, but it turns out he does exist, like Bigfoot or a good movie based on a video game. And what's more, Lois even uses her dad's contacts at CBS in order to get it picked up for a pilot.
I hope you brought the magic wand you wrote this with.
Yep, it's right here. Watch, I'll turn this beautiful princess into a toad.
Are we sure he didn't steal this script from somebody? Like, not just took the idea, but looted it off their corpse? Then again, when you hear some of the dialogue from this thing, you actually kind of believe this is all Brian's work.
Keep your chromium and magnesium, because I discovered a much more precious element. I discovered cadmium.
Everyone in this room should be jailed for life for entertaining this nonsense. Luckily, Elijah Wood doesn't get the role, which frees him up to be in that one show about the man-dog guy. But there's an actor out there who's much more fitting for Brian's quality of work.
Hey, what's up, douchebags? I'm here to audition for this stupid pilot.
And as soon as James Woods joins the show, the network begins to do what the network does best, butchering the idea until it's a husk of its former self. Seriously, even Jason Voorhees doesn't defile bodies as much as TV network heads do.
Well, we thought it would be a lot funnier if it was a sitcom.
It's not supposed to be funny.
Okay, but what if it was, right? Really makes us see things differently now, doesn't it? But Brian still has the chance to be behind a big network show, and he's not exactly one to have ironclad morals, so he decides to grit his teeth through the numerous changes.
That's not the title. It's called What I Learned on Jefferson Street.
Yeah, it didn't make a lot of sense now that he lives on Street.
The ship of Theseus theory is being tested right before our very eyes. So the show goes through production and finally hits airwaves, but it's not as bad as Brian predicted. It's actually a million times worse.
Someone's doing the monkey. Mr. Nubbins! Well, if you can't beat him.
Oh, someone should have had their head beaten in with a rock for letting something like this make air. Brian eventually steps away from the project, which is probably the only real noble thing he's done as a writer. But Brian would finally find the smash hit he always wanted when he pivots from writing novels to self-help slop in the aptly named episode Brian Writes a Bestseller.
And there's a note from my publisher. We are returning all of the unsold copies of Faster Than the Speed of Love.
But before he does that, what's one more round of being reminded of your greatest failure? So as all of Brian's books start to be returned in one piece and shredded for packing, Brian takes this as a sign that his writing career might be over.
Just put my heart out there and it keeps getting stomped on. Well, that's it. No more. I'm done writing.
If only you were a dog of your word. But without his writing, then what's going to be the reason for his rampant alcoholism? To make matters worse, Brian sees low-effort books rocketing to the top of the charts instead of his definitely well-thought-out novel.
I tell you, I could crap one of those things out in a night. I'm gonna tell Mom you said crap. No, I mean it. I could do it in 3 hours and idiots everywhere would buy it.
Oh yeah, the issue with your first book was that it was too smart. So despite mercifully swearing off writing altogether, Brian decides to take him up on his own challenge and pump out a self-help book for the drooling masses.
What are all the things you want most in the world? Use the following blank pages to write down all of your dreams and desires.
He's finally found the secret to writing a great book. Make sure it has as little of your own writing in it as possible. But after Stewie sends the book to a publisher as a goof, Brian is shocked to learn that Wish It, Want It, Do It is being picked up.
Brian, they're publishing your book! You're kidding. I can't believe it. That's the worst thing I've ever written.
I guess writing without your heart in it is the way to go. I'm gonna schedule a surgeon to remove my heart and see if we can get an uptick in views. So with Brian's book taking off, Stewie becomes his publicist and starts to land him some primetime spots to talk about his success.
And it's non-fiction, right? Yes, it is. Now, which one is that? I always forget. Is that the one that really happened or not?
Finally, the riveting intellectual discussions Brian always hoped his books would incite. And of course, this tiny little crumb of fame and recognition is enough to turn Brian into a self-absorbed jerk, telling people off and trying to slip his number to a girl wanting an autograph.
I'm a little creeped out.
Hey, congratulations. Somebody famous now hates you.
Famous is being pretty generous. Known for a thing is probably a lot more accurate. But Brian continues to let the newfound attention get to his head, eventually becoming so ungrateful that he ends up turning hostile towards the guy who actually got him to where he is.
Look, I have written a best-selling phenomenon. I should be sitting in the front damn room.
You'd think that book included the cure for cancer based on how he's acting. If anything, reading that thing probably speeds up the dying process if you read enough of it. And it gets to the point where Brian ends up firing Stewie when he doesn't accurately prepare him for his appearance on Real Time with Bill Maher.
I am done with you. Do you hear me? Done. Get out of here now. Brian, please. You're fired.
Sorry, Stewie, but mediocrity has no room for even more mediocrity. Brian's in need of a good dressing down, and all it takes is putting him in a room with a few people willing to call him out on his book's BS.
What books like these suggest is actually damaging to a large, gullible segment of the population.
Sounds like a guy who couldn't wish it, want it, or do it. And yes, wish it and want it are two very different things that honestly you need to have a pretty high IQ in order to quantify. And yes, I am using quantify correctly. But enough bashing from people Brian actually respects gets him to admit that he doesn't even believe the things he wrote about.
I think you're totally getting the wrong impression of me. I was just trying to write something that would sell. I think it's crap too.
Kinda sounds like you had the right impression all along. The least you could do when pushing your own crap is not be disgusted by the smell of it. That's a metaphor, because I too am be a writer. Oh well, just take your leave with whatever dignity you have left, Brian.
Bill, he's urinating.
That's it.
Look, Bill, can I
outside? No, outside.
Okay, well, I guess the last of his dignity just trickled down his leg. This episode not only further drives home the fact that Brian doesn't have the talent to be a famous writer, but also that it's within everyone's best interest to make sure he never reaches those heights ever again. But Brian doesn't know when to call it quits, as when the episode Stewie Goes for a Drive rolled around, he figured it was time to get started on his next novel.
All right, let's see. New novel. What's it about?
A genius at work. It's always a great sign when a writer feels obligated to write something rather than having a story that truly speaks to them.
A guy who loses everything, but finds his soul in Canada.
Doesn't that just make you want to fire up your Kindles and get your Goodreads review ready to go? I know the creative process looks different for everyone, but it's a real sight to see it in action through someone who doesn't have a single creative bone in their body.
And his name will be Norm Hull, because he's just a normal guy.
But Brian sure would try to push his original novel at any given moment, like at a book reading that wasn't for him in Mr. and Mrs. Stewie.
Mr. Franzen has informed us he's not coming. Like most real authors, he's too good for this dumb town.
Well, never fear, because there's someone who loosely classifies as a writer who can give people the show they were promised.
Well, this crowd was promised an author. No!
Stewie really should have broken that spray bottle out a while ago, like back when Brian first had thoughts about becoming a writer. But if he did, we wouldn't have this video, so I guess that's a small silver lining. And Brian would briefly transition from author to playwright, creating a stage play called A Passing Fancy that sees some success in Brian's play, but quickly gets overshadowed by Stewie's superior work.
I'm so excited for Brian.
Remember, kids, if it's terrible, at the end we all say, "You did it."
Is that what people say when they're just trying to be nice? Oof, now I need to go back and reevaluate every compliment I've ever received. But to Brian's credit, his play seems to actually resonate with people to the point where they refrain from throwing garbage at the stage.
What's it called?
A Passing Fancy.
Oh! That's the name of this play.
I'm surprised it's not too deep for Peter. Then again, that's probably more of an insult than a compliment. But the show ends up getting rave reviews, giving Brian a moderate hit.
If you see only one play as an adult, I urge you to see this one.
Kinda sounds like the writing of a guy who has only seen one play in his life. And of course, that good review is enough to pump hot air into his head until Brian thinks he's the second coming of George Bernard Shaw.
I mean, what's a rainbow's process? 2 parts rain, 1 part sun, 1 part childlike wonder.
And Brian is 1 part helium, 1 part BS. Some good does come from this, though, as this success for Brian actually inspires Stewie to write his own play, hoping that Brian could help give him some pointers. But in this case, the student has surpassed the, well, not master. I need to come up with something more derogatory.
God, it's miraculous.
So Brian does all he can to undermine and downplay Stewie's writing ability because there can only be one talented person in the house, and Brian refuses to be overshadowed by the baby who's built a teleporter, a time machine, and nuclear weapons. Yeah, now's the point that Brian should start feeling inadequate.
It wasn't good.
Oh no, really? Oh, I worked so hard on it.
But as long as that script exists, Stewie has the chance to achieve greater fame than Brian, so Brian does his best to try and hide the play. Unfortunately, Brian's as good at hiding things as he is at writing, easily foiled and one-upped by a baby.
I found this buried in the backyard next to your soup bone.
Dang, how did hiding the play in the same place you hide everything not work? Serial killers make this stuff look so easy. And Stewie is well aware his script is not only good, but leagues better than what Brian cooked up.
It's filled with terrible double entendres, puns, and stolen bits. There's a line in there from Seinfeld.
Rookie mistake, Brian. You gotta steal from shows nobody watched. Heck, this entire video is just stolen word for word from an episode of Joey. Brian's pretty self-conscious about his writing talents, so maybe Stewie was being a little harsh. But let's be real, Brian needed to have this shouted at him through a megaphone right next to his ear.
Your play panders to the lowest common denominator, Brian, and it doesn't even do that well.
But what does Stewie know outside of all the advanced scientific things he does know? Maybe if a real seasoned playwright got a chance to see Brian's play, they would see it for the masterpiece Brian surely thinks it is.
It was a piece of on it.
Nice, saving that for my next Letterboxd review. But maybe all this negativity can actually help Brian. People write depressing stuff all the time, and it's probably more in tune with how Brian actually feels than this happy-go-lucky crap.
There's your voice, Brian. It's a depressing voice, but it's yours. Write from that.
Just don't go all Hemingway on us. I think most people would rather have you alive and mediocre than great and dead. But even in death, the legacy of Brian's writing lives on. Not in the most flattering of ways, mind you. But Vinnie would attempt to mimic Brian in order to cheer Stewie up for Christmas in Christmas Guy.
What are you doing, Vinnie?
Vinnie? Who's Vinnie? My name is Brian, a.k.a. your favorite dog.
It's a nice sentiment from Vinnie, especially since he does a pretty good job at mimicking Brian's level of literary talent. He even ends up writing his own self-help book, which may only apply to those living in a Bronx neighborhood.
You wish you could open up a restaurant. You did not want to pay protection money. Knock, knock. Who's there? You blew it.
Oh, okay, so this is more of a demotivational book. I'm sure there's a market for it out there somewhere. You know, like people who have been having too good a life and need to be brought down a peg. So this isn't an actual piece of Brian's work, but it's more about the aesthetic, one that will live on to mock him long after he's gone. But when Brian comes back from the dead, he decides to re-enter the world of television writing by using his son Dylan to worm his way onto a show, and Brian's a bad father.
It's almost like the universe is trying to, I don't know, make us work together or something. I don't know.
The universe seemed pretty quiet about you reaching out and calling your son after all these years. Funny how that works. So when Dylan lands a starring role on a TV show, Brian decides to finally buddy up with him so he can land a gig in the writer's room. If I had seen class holes on this guy's resume, I would have immediately thrown it into an incinerator.
You probably have my novel, but just so you know, in here, I'm just one of the guys, all right? You have my novel, right?
I'm sure someone's got a copy in their bathroom somewhere. Not for some light reading, but just in case of emergency if they ever run out of toilet paper. And it doesn't take long for Brian's pseudo-intellectualism to infect the show's writing like a poison.
Stakes, twists, conclusion. Stwistusion.
That sounds made up.
All words are made up, idiot. But Brian's actually pretty indicative of how so many idiots get so far into these kinds of roles. You can know next to nothing, but as long as you sound and act like you might know something, that can take you pretty far.
Art is scary. This is writing, man.
At this point, surprised he's even worked out what he's meant to be doing. But it doesn't seem like many of the writers are buying what he's selling, so Brian decides to take some creative liberties and change the script without them knowing.
Aren't we all on bikes without helmets? Sometimes I just want to put this gun in my mouth.
Kids these days with their philosophizing and their Glocks. Brian has truly captured the minds of the show's demographic. Unfortunately, the showrunner just can't comprehend his creative vision, so he kicks him to the curb.
Sorry, Brian, but you're done.
Oh, come on! You can't fire a writer in the middle of a show!
Sure you can. We fired the writer of this script like a few sections ago, and I bet you didn't even notice. We like to keep things fresh, so we usually fire our writers a quarter of the way through. Our taxes are a nightmare. And thus ends Brian's second foray into television, where instead of losing credibility, he lost the respect of his son. Pfft, who cares? Can't put that on a resume. But it's clear Brian's novel is still near and dear to his heart, and it makes for the perfect bit of brown-nosing when Meg needs him to take the SATs for her in Our Idiot Brian.
I was just thinking about you. You know how I've always loved your novel, Faster Than the Speed of Love?
Well, she got the title right, so that's a good step in the right direction at least. But to really win Brian over, you gotta prove that you know ball. How about an excerpt to really butter him up?
How heavy he wondered is the human soul.
That's page 1. She's quoting page 1.
Hey, I'm impressed she was even able to make it that far. I always figured just touching the book would burn your skin and make your eyes roll into the back of your head.
Your book is genius, Brian. I can't believe Amazon is dumping it for 99 cents.
What? My book is on Amazon?
Seems kind of ironic because who knows how many trees in the actual Amazon had to be chopped down just to make the paper for his book. And how can you not be interested in buying it with a recommendation like this? You'll want to gouge your eyes out after having only read the first sentence. Finally, a book that makes you eligible for medical compensation. But Brian would try to find some inspiration in classic literature, deciding to write a sequel to The Old Man and the Sea in The Peter Principle.
All right, finally, some peace and quiet so I can buckle down and get some writing done.
Well, Joe and his drum kit have a different plan. How can you expect Brian to work with all this racket? It's not like he can close the window or move to a different part of the house. That would be insane.
Well, I'm trying to work on a sequel to The Old Man and the Sea.
Are you allowed to do that?
Are you saying Brian should put shackles and chains on his creative intuition? Or do you mean legally? Yeah, legally he can't do that. We got another decade or so until that thing hits the public domain. So someone needs to legally step in and stop him, not just for this, but to keep him from writing anything ever again. And while we guess this doesn't count as him writing something, the episode Bry Robot does revolve around him creating his autobiography through the robotic copy built by Stewie.
I just want my story to live on, even after I'm gone. You know, I always did want to write my autobiography.
Yeah, good luck with that, Brian. This show's lore has gotten so all over the place that I doubt even Brian knows what his origins are. But it might not be so hard as Stewie decides to help Brian out.
I'll help you write your biography. Really? You do that?
With acclaimed playwright Tony Dovolani in his corner, this might actually turn out to be something people want to put their eyes on. But Stewie's idea for Brian's autobiography turns out to be a little bit unconventional.
This robot is a living record of you and your history. It knows you and your mannerisms.
So it's like a book that doesn't have any pages to turn? Ooh, that's perfect for the new, incredibly depressing future generations who will get to learn about Brian. We are truly doomed, and all we'll have to remember of the past is a talking dog.
Oh no, Stewie's time machine broke, and now we are stuck in the history past. Well, that is one of my catchphrases.
So Robot Brian records anything and everything about Brian's life, but Brian decides to use him for a multitude of reasons, including helping him with a new script.
How come you didn't call it Bark Book? I thought you said you didn't have any notes.
Brian won't even listen to himself for feedback. No wonder everything he ever wrote is such a mess. But eventually, the robot just becomes another way for Brian to reaffirm himself in things he does not need reaffirmed, like believing his book is actually good.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, this is pretty much the only way this could have gone. Robot Brian is just a tool to be used by Brian to stroke his own ego, among other things. But it makes sense, as Robot Brian is a reflection of everything that Brian loves about himself, but he's also a reflection of everything he hates about himself too. Honestly, a pretty unbiased autobiography. I'd read that, or whatever it is you do with Robot Brian.
It's my job to break those word horses and ride them off into the green pastures of prose and poetry.
He's talking about writing, if that wasn't clear. He didn't even do any writing, he just changed the margins in the document. He really is Brian. And when Brian finally realizes that, it becomes clear what Stewie's intention with this robot was.
You wanted to write your autobiography, and I needed to show you that no one wants to read your autobiography.
A harsh truth, but that can't be the first time Brian has heard this exact sentiment. But he's a stubborn one, and he's just gonna keep on trucking despite everyone telling him not to. And Stewie's sentiments would more or less come true when Brian decides to release an actual autobiography in the episode The Bird Reich, where he learns that Stewie discarded his signed copy.
The last 2 months, I've really gotten my act together. I stopped drinking, and I'm about to self-publish a book.
As I live and breathe, has Brian finally found a way to lock in and be an actual writer rather than the shadow of one? I'm gonna need some hard physical evidence before I start buying into that.
That's amazing you wrote a book. Well, thanks. You know, I'm having a little publishing party on Thursday. I'd love it if you could come.
But lo and behold, Brian actually has himself a book and manages to pull a halfway decent turnout to his reading.
So I turned to Fran Lebowitz and said, I may have been born in a litter, but I'm definitely not trash.
Honestly, props to him for holding a reading for all these people. Now they don't have to waste their money on buying the book to know whether it's good or not.
What a night! I mean, most authors wouldn't have read the whole book.
Even more of a reason for them not to spend their money. I guess this makes Brian a true artist, sharing his work with the world regardless of financial compensation. Oh, to be a guy who pays for nothing and mooches off of everyone around him. But Brian really appreciates Stewie being there and gifts him with a signed copy of the book, which I'm sure he'll cherish forever.
Is this my book? This is the copy I gave to Stewie.
Oof, the neighborhood library claims another unneeded book. Those things are cool in theory, but they really just end up being glorified decorated garbage cans to a point, right? Stewie, of course, denies any accusation of giving it away.
Well, it's your copy, so you tell me. Oh, that's ridiculous. My copy is right here on my bookshelf. What?
I don't want to alarm you, but there appears to be some kind of autobiography Robin Hood on the loose, stealing the unwanted books from the rich and giving them to the poor, who don't want them either. But Stewie keeps playing dumb, trying to convince Brian that he's on his side.
Not only did I not give away your book, I'm launching an investigation, and I'm gonna nail the guy who did it.
Nailing guys was already in Stewie's schedule, so this works out perfectly. But when Brian finds ring camera footage of Stewie getting rid of the book, Stewie's forced to finally come clean.
I sat through your reading, I said congratulations, I took the book. Where do my obligations end?
I can't believe I'm gonna defend Brian and his dumb book, but I think Stewie's out of line. Just toss the book into the closet and never think about it again. You don't have to just outright get rid of it. Brian is pretty crushed, especially since Stewie didn't even read what he wrote for him on the inside.
My best friend, my inspiration, and the only person who truly gets me. I owe you everything.
Brian should have a moral right to beat Stewie to death with said book. It might not be a good book, but at least it was made in earnest, something Stewie's wanted from Brian for years. And so, ever the drama queen, Brian decides to once again quit writing altogether.
You got your wish, Stewie. I quit. You'll never have to worry about keeping one of my books again.
So Stewie and Chris decide they need to help Brian and brainstorm how to lift his spirits again.
Perhaps we can lift Brian out of his funk if we get his book on the New York Times bestseller list. It would only take 1,500 copies.
I'm sorry, what? That's it? This changes everything. I'm dropping that Sweaty Clam children's book, The Clam Who Sweats. It's actually a pretty sweet story about my life. Super graphic though. The kids need to know the truth. But that doesn't work, and Brian is even more mad after learning that they tried, but Stewie manages to explain himself.
Because you set out to do something and you did it, unlike me and my goals.
Oh, so he was just jealous of Brian. Yeah, that's a good enough lie to win Brian back over. And now Stewie's learned a valuable lesson. Next time, dispose of Brian's book outside state lines like it's a body. And Brian would try his hand at writing true crime when he teams up with Joe to help him with a case he couldn't solve in Supermarket Pete.
Watching TikToks of underage girls, also a part of your writing process.
Buddy, it's part of every single one of his processes. But Brian's struggling to become inspired for his next writing project. That is until Joe starts talking about his several murder cases.
We had one last year. All signs pointed to the husband.
What happened?
It was the husband.
The perfect crime. It just always goes to show that your culprit is always the one who has the most evidence stacked up against them. No need to look too deep though. You'll know when you've got enough to call it. So Joe lets Brian go through the police station's case files for inspiration, and the two decide to team up to turn tragedy into cash.
I'm thinking we go novel, podcast, docuseries, then full-blown blockbuster.
It's the perfect pipeline, and maybe the families can have a little bit of the proceeds. Look, if they wanted all the attention, they should have been the ones to get murdered. You snooze, you lose. So Brian and Joe get right to work on the next big cash grab.
No one from Beverly Hills had ever been strangled by their own cheerleader skirt before.
Sounds like something Ryan Murphy would make, where all the characters are hot and the killer is pure evil, but dang, there's just something about him that makes you want to dress up as him for Halloween. But the case they're writing about is a cold case, so they're without a culprit and without an ending.
Do you know what this means?
We're gonna put on our Sherlock Holmes hats and solve the murder ourselves.
Well, one of you is gonna have to be Watson, but yes. Maybe let Brian be Watson, since he's not as smart but still gets to take the credit. So they decide to talk to the victim's parents first with as much grace as they can muster when millions of potential dollars are on the line.
We're writing a future hit novel based on your daughter's murder. We just need to know who did it. And between us, it'd be great if one of you did.
Somehow, these folks are not too keen on the idea. Anti-art plebeians, I tell ya. But while dropping a log on their lawn, Brian discovers a box buried in the ground.
Look, I found something.
It's a key to a storage unit.
But when they go to check out the storage locker, they're intercepted by a group of podcasters. Just despicable what they do, capitalizing on other people's pain. Writers like Brian were doing that first. Respect your elders, know your role, and stay in your lane.
Big fan of your work. No one turns another person's suffering into profit better.
And all it takes is a little bloodshed to make Joe and Brian realize they're no better than them. So the case will have to remain cold, but at least these two reaffirm their friendship. Well, are they friends? Or are they just acquaintances connected by Peter? Wouldn't want to put labels on anything.
It was nice to spend some time with someone who actually believed in my writing.
Well, as someone who's never read a book, I absolutely do.
But Brian would return to the world of Faster Than the Speed of Love and Fahrenheit 451 when the book finally finds an audience, though it's not exactly the kind of audience he was hoping for.
And they want to change the books you read because they think you can't handle it.
So while Brian is rallying against book censorship, he gets mistaken for someone fighting against the woke mobs coddling books from the past. Brian will just identify as anything based on who's willing to give him the time of day.
We think our viewers would really appreciate your point of view.
Really?
Absolutely. Call me.
Unfortunately for Brian, that guy works for Fox News. That'd be like Luke Skywalker working with the Empire. Well, Brian's not really much of a Luke Skywalker type. He's more of a, Claude.
I just want books to be left alone. This has nothing to do with the migrant crisis.
You're right. It has everything to do with it.
But while Brian failed to get his point across, it did lead to a renewed interest in his novel as it started to become widely accepted by those on the right.
Your book, Faster Than the Speed of Love, is back on the shelves.
Really? Nice.
If abandoning your morals to pander to the people you dislike counts as noise, then yeah, I guess this is pretty noise. But any publicity is good publicity, so Brian agrees to do a reading at a gathering for conservatives.
I can't believe you're selling out like this.
I'm not selling out. I'm presenting my art in its rawest form.
And the thing about consuming things raw is that there's an even higher chance it'll kill you, so hey Brian, can I interest you in some of your raw art? But when a far left group comes to protest the reading, Brian finally snaps on both sides.
You wimps want to edit any book that hurts your precious feelings, and you freaks just want to ban books altogether.
Finally, someone brave enough to take the centrist stance. Where would we be without fence-sitters like Brian? But once the crowd actually reads the book, they realize it's nothing to sweat over.
There's a map at the front that doesn't pay off. Every sentence starts with "and then."
Who knew slop like that would be enough to bring people on both sides of the aisle together? Maybe Brian should keep writing, because hidden somewhere in those tired cliches and blatant plagiarisms might just be the secret to world peace. And speaking of plagiarism, Brian decides to publish Mark Twain's iconic work, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, after the time-displaced writer becomes obsessed with modern trappings in Twain's world.
What do you think we should write about?
Well, the best stories are all about a man and a boy going on an unsupervised journey.
He's got a point there. There's The Road, Temple of Doom, Three Men and a Baby. That last one's the best, you see, because 3 is better than 1. But while they brainstorm and ponder, Twain starts to become obsessed with the magical technological devices of today, and all of the naked women that can be found on them.
What is a Latina? It's like a regular woman, but different. I think I like it.
I guess we know who's up marking their Twain right now. And that doesn't even scratch the surface of the wild stuff you can find there. Forget books, all Mark Twain wants to do is completely devote his life to smut, because in his eyes, that's where the future is.
I love I wanna make I wanna be
Well, who are we to stand in the way of a man and his passions? But with Twain gone, there's no one to usher in some of history's greatest written works. Well, luckily, Brian has a copy of the Huckleberry Finn manuscript, so he decides to submit it under his own name.
You had a grown man traveling with and clearly grooming a young boy. They were on an adventure.
Yeah, it turns out certain things aren't looked on too kindly outside of the context in which they were written. But I wouldn't expect Brian to understand context or even know what that word means. So whether it be through books, TV, plays, or even the written works of another man, Brian proves time and time again that writing just might not be his forte. But if he stopped trying, we wouldn't have anything to make fun of, and for that, we tip our hat to you, oh great auteur. And you can give us a tip of the hat by leaving a like on this video and subscribing to the channel so you can catch more great Family Guy videos uploaded every week.